So, welcome again, everybody. Today we have a fantastic set of speakers all about putting beneficial insects to work. I'm Joanne Baumgartner with Wild Farm Alliance, and I'm going to go over a couple of things about the webinar, and then we'll get started. All participants are muted. If you have technical issues, you can chat with the moderator who will help you and put your questions for the speakers in the chat, and our moderators will help get those answered by the speakers. Wild Farm Alliance has a bold 2050 vision. We want to see 1 million nest boxes and perches on farms, hedgerows to the moon and back, and the riparian habitat restored. Let's see, this is advancing funny. We have a bunch of CE courses that are available on demand. There's 14 hours, 6 free courses that have 14 hours, and you can get to them right there, wildfarmalliance.org/CE. These are continuing education classes that are approved by the Department of Pesticide Regulation. And this lesson also has 1.5 continuing education units available. You're going to need to give your license number at the end of the webinar and take a quiz at the end too. We're also, because of these credits, you'll be taking some quizzes in the middle of, everybody will take quiz in the middle of the webinar. We're gonna go to our first speaker, David James. He's a professor at the Department of Entomology, and he is from Washington State University. Thanks, David.
Thank you. I'll share my presentation. So I'm going to be, obviously, the title of this webinar, Naturescaping for Beneficial Insects and Conservation Biological Control. All my work, as you've heard, is in Washington State, and primarily with grapes, as you can see in this slide here. But the concepts and most other things are, applicable to other crops as well. Now I think, oh, there you go. Okay, so generally beneficial insect populations have declined, of course. I mean, we've all heard, I imagine, the talk about insect Armageddon and insect populations throughout the world declining. And this is a real thing to a greater or lesser extent. And certainly, beneficial insect populations have declined in many areas, particularly agricultural areas where, we've taken away their natural habitats and replaced it with agriculture. But the concept is to, if we want to produce crops with minimal pesticide inputs and a more organic approach and ecosystem approach, then we have to look at habitat restoration, bringing back particularly native plants, because that's what the natural enemies that we're hoping to get to do the job that they were designed for in our agriculture. That's what they depended upon in the past, the native plants and the native ecosystem. So the idea is to bring that back, both for refugia. All beneficial insects need protection, as everything does really, but also to provide refueling and other resources like nectar. So, you can use ground covers for that or refugia around a crop. So the goal is to encourage natural enemies of pests to become resident in or near crops. Most of these natural enemies are winged, and so they can move around the landscape, pretty effectively, some of these insects. The larger they are, the better able they are to move around. So having resources around the edge of a crop is good, is sometimes just as good as having them in the crop, along the rows. So it's called naturescaping is a term for this, or farmscaping. And so the idea is provide natural resources to benefit natural enemy communities. We're not looking at specific insects, it's the community that's important. And the function and success is, in suppressing herbivores, i.e. the pests that we're trying to, protect the crop from, is enhanced by cultural strategies. We can do things like the native habitat restoration to enhance their populations. Pesticides are usually a deal breaker. So these things work better on, agricultural crops that have minimal use of pesticides, or preferably no pesticides at all. So organic systems are obviously better. But, a few pesticides are okay, depending what they are. And so there is, room for, sometimes for having minimal pesticide use and still having biological control provided by these natural enemies. But as I said, organic farming offers the best opportunity for conservation biological control. And that's a term I'll use a lot: conservation biocontrol, which is biocontrol provided by the natural enemies that are in the environment already. We just encouraging them to become part of the crop ecosystem. However, even in organics, there's some compounds that may still be harmful to a limited extent. So you need to be aware of that. So conservation biological control, I like to think of it as a merger between farming and ecology. And that's basically what it is. We're trying to get the ecosystem, the crop ecosystem, to more resemble a natural ecosystem. That's the goal. I mean, that, we can only go so far in that, obviously, but that's what we try to do. And, over time and over decades in the future, we'll get closer to that goal. We're improving things all the time as research is being done. One of an early example developed in the UK was the idea of beetle banks, which is like this green strip in the middle in between a, agricultural cereal field, that provides a home for predatory beetles, and probably other beneficials too. And then you've got things like hedgerows, which I know you're well aware of the importance of, in California in particular. Washington, we don't really do hedgerows very much, unfortunately, but that's probably because, most of the agricultural areas of Washington are hot and dry, and so there's not much opportunity to have hedgerows established. The UK is very big, and European, hedgerows is a big thing there, and they certainly do a wonderful job of providing habitat for beneficials very close to agriculture. And so, I'm talking about beneficial insects so far as, the predators and parasitoids to control pests, but pollinators are also very important too, increasingly so, as we realize the importance of them. And I do a lot of research on butterflies, so pollinators are important and close to my heart as well. So farmscaping with native plants, native grasses. There's a list there of some of the benefits from native grasses. It's not just increasing populations. Native grasses are not so good for beneficial insects generally, but they certainly enhance arachnid, which are spiders, and mite populations. But you can see the other benefits too. And that's the thing with, habitat restoration. There's more than the benefit to pest control that we're aiming for. There's other things that accrue from this strategy as well. Trees and bushes are important. They're reservoirs of important biocontrol agents. They're almost an ecosystem on their own. You can think of them as, providing, there's so many things within a tree and bushes, the protection, the bark, the flowers, the leaves, so there's a diversity of natural enemies and pollinators that use them, different microenvironments too, microclimate, and even habitat for some vertebrate predators of pests. So just a single tree can be very important in the landscape. So here, there's a schematic where, it's a place where I used to live, and you can see, the crops over here, the orchards, and then all this habitat around, which doesn't look much. It looks scrubby, but it's a habitat for these beneficial insects, that have lived there for millennia, and we want to use them to provide pest control within the orchards. And so that's what they do if they're allowed to. And I mentioned earlier that it's the community of natural enemies that we're interested in attracting, not just specific. So most pests have a diverse mixture of so-called specialist and generalist natural enemies that prey upon them. And that's characteristic of CBC, the conservation biological control. And you get the best conservation biological control when you have the community, not just one specific predator generally. So this slide is showing all the predators of mites in Washington grapevines, just one crop, one pest, and you can see there's a community there, that, and you get the best biocontrol if you have as much of the community there as possible. You can get good biocontrol with just, this one here, which is the a mite-eating lady beetle and the predatory mite. You have those two together, they do a pretty good job. But if for some reason they're not very good population-wise, then these other natural enemies can come in and provide the same control. So that's an important point, communities. So what we're trying to do is diversify the agro-ecosystems, as I said, and the benefits are, as I've also said, for other things, as you can see, that are listed there. Um, you know, not the least of is increased, enhanced aesthetics. The crop looks better if you have a little bit of break in it. Not always possible, of course. And the other thing is that this type of strategy works better in small agricultural concerns, not huge, mega, business agriculture, which unfortunately is becoming, more prevalent. It's harder to achieve habitat restoration in those type of concerns. So providing refuge and shelter is a key component, and overwintering habitat is important too. So they're not just doing the job in the summer for providing protection. It's the winter too, because all the beneficial insects have to overwinter in some form or another, depending on the species. And a lot of them do overwinter as adults or larvae or insect or as eggs. And sometimes it can be in things like this sagebrush here. This in my environment, sagebrush is a dominant plant on the landscape. And it is, we know it's a very important plant for overwintering in. So you can, keep your sagebrush nearby your farm, so that the beneficials don't have so far to travel in the spring to get a good start. And that's an important thing, to get a good start early in the spring on, feeding on the pests. Improving the microclimate is important in a, hot, dry environment, in like central Washington is in the summer. So just a small pond somewhere will provide the resources that insects need, beneficial insects need. Wherever there's water, you'll find insects, including beneficial insects, predators and parasitoids. And importantly, nectar and pollen for beneficials. So, even if they're not things like predatory flies, or like this is a syrphid fly whose larvae are predatory, but bees and there's many insects, even things like lady beetles, which you wouldn't really think of as needing nectar, they do. Predatory bugs, they all like a little bit of nectar from time to time. So if you have nectar around, you will help maintain the populations of that community of beneficials, not just the obvious things like pollinators. So, what are the benefits of native plants? A lot of the plants used in the past were ornamentals, and there are problems in those, both in establishing and maintaining, because of hot, dry conditions, and farmers don't usually want to, irrigate specifically for the companion plants. And so there's a lot of benefits to native plants because they're locally adapted and evolved for the region that you're in. So there's usually little need to irrigate them because they're adapted to whatever the environment is there, the climate there. So in our environment, where it's hot and dry in the summer, there are plants that have adapted to that, and they don't need, extra irrigation. So growing those is good. The farmer doesn't have to spend time and money on looking after them. And also that native plants are more likely to enhance other ecosystem services besides the beneficial insects or the predators and parasitoids. They'll also enhance pollinators and, small creatures like lizards and um, snakes and, small vertebrates because they've evolved with them and they provide services for them, and they will help perhaps in a small way manage the pests too. Lizards feed on small insects, large insects. And native plants are, a lower cost in keep maintaining, of course, for the reasons I've just said, and they're better survival. So there's many reasons. Hardy and climate adapted and don't need special attention. Um, and but the important thing is, I'm going to talk a bit about some of the plants that are important for central Washington. Some of them will be important for wherever you are living, but a lot of them won't be. And so the native plants need to be assessed for their benefits for every region, California, Oregon, wherever, because they'll be different in different areas. And so that research would need to look at what native plants are best in terms of, being a benefit for beneficial insects. And so we did this research some years ago, and I'm going to talk about it briefly. And so first of all, just mention predators, and you're probably all familiar with what predators are. But as I've already said, many are generalists, and those are the ones we want to encourage. And communities work best, and we want to attract as many as possible. So predators eat the pests. That's what they do. They're the carnivores. They're the lions and tigers. So just a few groups. There's true bugs, which are like stink bugs, and most stink bugs are actually beneficial. I mean, there's a few famous ones like the marmorated stink bug that's a pest, but most of them, if they're brown like this, are usually beneficial. And then there's lady beetles, which everybody knows they feed on aphids, but they also feed on mites and thrips and insect eggs and even small caterpillars. So they're more than just aphid eaters. And their larvae also are predators. So it's adults and larvae. So you got, double the bang for your buck, if you like. And that applies to all lady beetles. And there's many different species of lady beetles too. And then there's the hover or flower fly, which as you can see from this picture, they look like wasps, and they often get mistaken for wasps. And even in the past, I've heard of growers spraying them because they didn't think they were a good idea. But they're an important pollinator, and their larvae feed on aphids and sometimes mites. So this is another beneficial that's good as an adult, as a pollinator, and also good as a immature as a predator on small insects. And there's the minute pirate bug, as the name suggests. It's small, but it's very mobile and a generous predator, feeding on the things listed at the bottom there. Excellent predator, and they can have a lot of impact on pests in a short period of time. And this one can too, the mite-eating lady beetle. Hard to see. It looks like a full stop on a page. It's that small, but it's a lady beetle, a black lady beetle, common name spider mite destroyer, and that's what it does. It is a very efficient spider mite predator. And then there's the parasitoids, and these are the insects that get under the skin, if you like. They bore inside and eat from the inside out. So these are mummies of aphids, which are the dead shell of an aphid that's been parasitized, and there's the tiny wasp there. So they're often unseen. You don't see these parasitoids because they're so small. But they parasitize just about every insect. There's a whole plethora of species. So, and we're still discovering new ones. And they're tiny, as I said. So anyway, moving on to the species of flowering plants, we did a lot of research over a number of years. I won't go into the details here, but from all that work over 3 or 5 years, 3 to 5 years, these are our dozen best native plants for overall beneficial insect diversity listed there. So you can see dogbane, yarrow, rabbit brush, goldenrod, pearly everlasting, the buckwheats, which is a group. I'll speak more about some of these plants. Milkweeds, coyote mint, western hyssop, nettles, which some of you will not like, wild rose and lupine. They're the dozen best. May not be the same dozen in your area, but yarrow will certainly be there. The buckwheats and the milkweed and the rabbit brush probably will be, nettles, wild rose. So that, yeah, this is pretty applicable. So in our research, we looked at different beneficials and found that, different beneficials have seem to prefer different plants. Like lady beetles, the two species of buckwheat there were very attractive. So we did that for a lot of species, but I don't have time to talk about that. Big sagebrush was the number one plant species in terms of total number of insects attracted. So that wasn't a reflection of biodiversity. It only attracted 5 of the 10 groups of beneficials, mostly parasitic wasps. So they're good for parasitic wasps, and I've also mentioned they're good for overwintering of not just parasitic wasps, but other species too. But they're not the best in terms of diversity, but they're certainly good in numbers of parasitic wasps, for example. Rabbit brush is much better, and I hope you're familiar with that. It's dominant on the landscape in the autumn, and it attracts large numbers of a wide range of beneficial insects. So if you want a bush like, sagebrush, rabbit brush type, rabbit brush would be the better choice. It's covered in insects in the autumn because it's usually one of the only flowering things in the drier areas of the West at that time of year. Buckwheats are very important. And there's another plant called buckwheat, which was used in the past and still is used, I guess, but it's a cereal species, and it is very good for beneficial insects, but it's not drought resistant and like our native buckwheats are here. So this is a group of plants called Eriogonum. You should look them up if you're not familiar with them, but they're dominant in the Western US. I think it's the only place in the world they live. And we have many species, maybe 20, 30 species. There's even an Eriogonum society, would you believe, people that are enthusiasts about buckwheats. And so they're pretty attractive. They've got yellow flowers, white flowers, and they're all very good at attracting beneficial insects, a wide range, biodiverse attraction of beneficial insects. In our area, we have about 10 species, and the different species flower from early spring to late summer. I actually wrote a paper about this some years ago. If anyone's interested, you can contact me and I'll send you a copy. But they've got great potential as ground covers. We did some research and trials looking at them as ground covers. They're very hardy. As I said, they're drought resistant, so you can mow them down, and they come back. They're perennial. And yeah, they're excellent. And throughout the West, even though our research is in Washington, I'm confident that throughout the West they will be good. And for me, they're very important too, because they're also hosts for a number of butterfly species, like the small blues and green species and metal marks. All their caterpillars from these, a multitude of species feed on buckwheat. So again, you've got, benefits to predators and parasitoids, but also pollinators too. The same goes for showy milkweed, which you all know as being the host plant of monarch butterflies, of course, but they also attract a large number of beneficials from 8 of the 10 beneficial insect groups that we were monitoring. So they attract not just pollinators, but predators and parasitoids during the time that they're flowering. I think I can see one on the plant there, I didn't notice before. So yeah, it's not just for monarch butterflies. So even though I am actually a monarch butterfly guy and I research monarch butterflies, I always tell people grow milkweed for beneficial insects and pollinators. And if you get monarchs, then great, you've got the double bonus. But it definitely is. Our program is called Beauty of Benefits, and so this is a plant really. There's beauty and butterfly benefits and a whole range of pollinators, as well as predators and parasitoids. Lupines are another group that are attracted to beneficials, but also butterflies as well. Willows are another example of that, attractive to beneficial insects, but also caterpillars of all these four species on the screen here feed on willows. Yarrow is another widespread species that is excellent for beneficial insects, a wide diversity. But the cautionary note here is don't go out and use ornamental cultivars, the yellow and the red. They're not as good. The breeding for the color has somehow reduced their attractiveness to beneficial insects. So you need to go to a native plant nursery and use the natural white colored native form if you're going to use it for beneficial attraction. Stinging nettles, the subject that nobody really wants to talk about, but you know, I grew up in England, and one of the first plants I ever experienced, because it stung me, I guess, but I soon learned to love them when I realized that that they were hosts for butterflies. But here in Washington State, I looked at their attractivity to beneficial insects and found that they attracted minute pirate bugs, the hoverflies, and parasitic wasps. So they're, for some reason, we don't know why, because it's not the flowers necessarily, although they do have, sort of very subtle flowers. And it could be those, I suppose. But whatever the reason, they do seem to attract beneficial insects. And then you've got the fact that they are hosts for these butterfly species. So another plant that has this double attraction for butterflies and beneficial insects. I don't know how I'm doing for time. You need to interrupt me if I use up my time. But looking at vineyards in Washington that have enhanced their vineyards with native habitat. And there were some that had done this for many years, for not for this reason, but for the fact that it looked nicer. And so we took the opportunity to examine them for the amount of pest and beneficial insects they have, and butterflies for a couple of years. And so we looked at the habitat enhanced vineyards, and we assumed that habitat enhanced had that number of species in or close to vineyards, something like in this picture here, compared to the conventional where there was less than 10 flowering native plant species that were near the vineyard, not actually in it, as you can see here, because herbicides were used, and this is sort of the conventional old-fashioned treatment of vineyards. Anyway, long story short, the beneficial insects this is the bar for beneficial insects in habitat enhanced vineyards compared to the conventional. So you can see there's like double the number per trap that we were using for beneficial insects. And this is the native habitat, higher still, as you'd expect. And then looking at the pests, the number of pests was higher despite their spraying of chemicals. Some chemicals actually make things worse. Compared to the habitat enhanced, these both were habitat enhanced. So it did seem to work, looking at this practical example in commercial vineyards. And then looking at the butterflies in the conventional, we found 9 butterfly species over the 2 years compared to 29 butterfly species in the habitat enhanced. So that was pretty cool to see that a little bit of effort in restoring native habitat can have a big impact, both on the bottom line in terms of crop protection, but also enhancement of butterfly populations. And butterflies are a group of insects that are declining considerably throughout the world. But so anything we can do to help them is great. So basically, what I've been talking about is, the better plant diversity you have, the better beneficial insect diversity, and the better conservation biological control of pests. It's a fairly simple equation, not necessarily always simple to achieve, but you can go some way to achieving it, as we just saw from that example in beneficial in the habitat restored vineyards. So I'll just speak a little briefly about pollinator decline. Habitat loss is the major cause of pollinator decline. We think the fragmentation of it, or the direct loss of it, the fragmentation and degradation through increased pesticide use, of course, and environmental pollution. Um, and some of the other things, climate change is at the bottom there. It may not necessarily be at the bottom. All insects are, you know, adapting to climate change. Some are better than others, and certainly some pollinators are struggling with climate change. But habitat loss appears to be the most important factor driving bee declines. Is, you know, research showing that. And so that, and it's probably going to apply to butterflies too, and other pollinators as well. So pollinator conservation, you know, everything I've spoken about so far is actually good for pollinators too. You know, increased floral availability, flowers, and you can do that in urban areas, and I'm sure you know you can do it in your backyard, and grasslands everywhere. Pollinators are across the landscape. Reducing pesticide use or not using pesticides is another important component to of course. Um, so, so yeah. I I have no idea how much time I've taken, but I assume it's about half now. Um, and so I have finished. Thank you. And I think we're going to have questions in a different way, not you asking me.
Yes, that's right. Thank you, David. Fantastic presentation. Um,
Thank you.
uh, we do have a couple questions, but first let's do our poll. I think Ashley's going to pull this up, and the audience, please answer. There's two questions here, and we'll wait a minute or two for you to answer them, and then David will go over them.
Okay. Well, I can see the results, I think. Um,
Yes. Yeah, it looks like we're about three quarters of the audience now. Um, yeah, why don't we just end the poll and you can go over them?
so the question number one was, what attracts and sustains beneficial insects on farmland? And 95% of people said providing nectar, refugia, moisture, and overwintering resources, which was the correct answer. So I must have spoken clearly, and you heard me, which is good. Um, so
And
yeah,
the second question,
second question, the biggest threat to native pollinators, and most people, 78% said habitat loss, which it is. The second 22% of you said pesticides, which is a significant threat too. Um, you know, when they're used. I mean, I've spent my whole career trying to get people not to use them and to find alternatives to pesticides. That's what I based my career on. But you know, pesticides are still used, and when they're used, they obviously do pose the greatest threat. You know, when they're being used. But if they're not being used, and in natural habitat, then you know the habitat loss is the prime thing. So really, they're both correct in a way. So yeah, that's you answered very well, the audience. Thank you.
yay. Yeah, speaking of, well, let's take some, or I'll go over some of the questions that people have asked, and we can take a few minutes to do that before Saul starts speaking. Um, But since you mentioned pesticides, I know I saw on your slides that spinosad and pyrethrins, which are both used by organic farmers, can be a problem. And why is that?
Well, there's research being done with spinosad that shows that it's not as harmless as it was considered to be, I guess, at the beginning when it was. I mean, I'm surprised that it's still available. I assume it's still available for organic farming because there's other materials that are less harmful that haven't been approved for organic farming. So I really don't understand that. I mean, it needs to be changed because there's research now showing that spinosad is a good killer of some caterpillars. So you know, it's puzzling, and and pyrethroids are the same. Synthetic pyrethroids are a well-known killer, and natural pyrethroids, which are approved for organic, are also to a lesser extent relatively harmful to some pests or some insects. It's not across the board necessarily. And so you could probably, depending on what your pest is, you can probably see how harmful it is. Um, so yeah, it's a bit of a puzzle really why they are still available.
Yeah, and so they're more broad spectrum, I think. Is that right?
Yes.
Than some other kinds of pesticides. And
Yeah.
so
Well.
growers should really look for pesticides that for their specific pest.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've worked a lot on attractants for insects, and there's one that's called methyl salicylate, which is a natural product that's produced by plants, and it works really well. Um, and there's a synthetic version made. In fact, methyl salicylate is in a lot of products that we use, like toothpaste. Anyway, it's cheap and available, and it's synthetically made, and it's just hanging these dispensers in the crop. It's not actually spraying it or anything, and that's not allowed in organic farming, which is amazing to me. Why that should be when it's a natural product and it doesn't kill anything. It attracts beneficial insects, and yet it's not approved for organic farming, and yet spinosad and pyrethrin are. So that just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, here's a couple of questions related to pesticides. If a grower is going to spray conventional pesticides, would you rather them to not plant habitat in case the insecticides kill the beneficial insects? Or are there other benefits that outweigh those risks?
Um, well, I mean, depending on the pesticide that's used, um, a lot of pesticides are short-lived. So if there's harm done to the natural habitat, it will only be short-lived. Um, you know, Next year's fine, or maybe later this year will be fine. So I, sometimes pesticides are used in emergency. To save a crop. So just because of that, you're not, and in the future, you're going to want to continue trying to encourage predators and natural enemies, beneficials. So you'll need that natural habitat. So no, I wouldn't get rid of the natural habitat for, limit. I mean, if you're using pesticides continually, then I guess there's no real point because it'll be a barren space. There won't be anything using it very much.
Right. Um, this person is asking about, is there any quantified savings or research that quantifies the savings on the inputs of uh, um, how you reduce pesticides when you put in insectary habitat? I know here in California, Rachel Long has documented that with mm, um, Laura, I forget her,
Brandon.
Miranda, thank you, who was a speaker on one of our earlier webinars. But do you have anything to add to that, David?
So what was the question in the
Oh,
habitat?
are there pesticide savings? Has anybody documented that you save money when you put this habitat in?
Yeah, yeah,
Basically, you're
I'm s-
saving money because you're reducing pesticide inputs.
right. Yeah, there is. You can find examples of that. Researchers have documented. In my own research, I've documented um, reduction in the number of sprays required, for example, in hops and grapes by encouraging natural enemies. That we did that a couple of decades ago. So that's a clear example where a hop grower only has to apply miticide once instead of twice. That's a huge saving. And so there's many examples of that in the literature. So there's no doubt that restoring natural habitat. I mean, even if you don't make it completely organic, without pesticides, you're going to reduce the input of pesticides, even if it's one pesticide spray. I mean, these days, pesticide application is a huge amount of money compared to what it was a couple of decades ago. So just one spray less in a crop um, is going to save a lot of money, much more than the beneficials are going to cost you either in applying them, as Sal would talk about, or the cost it took to restore the habitat, which usually is just a one-off cost anyway, but you'll get your money back pretty quick.
Yes, very cool. Thanks, David. Let's save the rest of the questions for after Saul's presentation. So
Okay.
thanks again, David. If you can quit sharing your screen, then Saul will share his.
Sure.
Hi, everyone. Don't know if you can see me.
We can see you, Saul,
Okay.
and we can't see your presentation yet. This is
Yeah, I
Saul
just
Alba
kind of
with
wanted everyone to see what I look like.
That's a good idea.
So I'm Saul Alba. I work for BioBee USA. We produce natural enemies, both predators and parasitoids, for crop protection, basically. And I'm going to now share. I'm going to talk about augmentation's role in conservation biological control. Okay, there we are. So first, just a definition. Probably don't need to define this for this audience, but I thought I'd put it in because there's a key point to this definition. So Cornell University defines biological control as a reduction of pest populations by natural enemies and typically involves an active human role. Now, this two branches of biological control is not exactly totally correct, but it's essentially, there are essentially two branches. The one that David just talked about, Conservation Biological Control, CBC, and Center for Agriculture and Bioscience International defines it as farming practices that aim to increase the abundance of natural enemies already in the environment. For instance, improving the environmental conditions help natural enemies thrive. So again, farming practices, that's an active role, but you are attracting and sustaining natural enemies that are already in the environment to the crop. The augmentative biological control is when you're actually increasing the populations of natural enemies by distributing them in the crop. So again, active role, farmers are actually placing the natural enemies that are reared in insectaries into the crop area on a regular and timely basis. The natural enemies may not already be present in or near the crop. I work in augmentative biological control, but my real passion is conservation biological control. So key point of this presentation is that the two branches are not mutually exclusive practices. So conservation biological control can make augmentative biological control work better. And there are actually a few situations where augmentation may be the preferred strategy. And this is what I'm going to cover today. Oops. Okay, so first on augmentation. I want to give a brief explanation on the strategy behind augmentation. And the easiest way that I can think to do this is by talking about the Lotka-Volterra model. And this is a model about the relationship between predator and prey populations could be a natural ecosystem, but it could be, it's relevant also to agriculture. Okay, so what this model proposes is that the dynamics of predator and prey populations have a tendency to oscillate. And so this graph right here is showing that natural oscillation of the predator and prey populations. And it's pretty basic to understand it. Basically, when the predator populations start small, the prey population, the predator population starts small when the prey population is small, and it's only when the prey populations grow that the predator populations grow. And then predators eating the prey causes their populations to decline, and the predator populations declines. If you look at these, the blue peaks there, notice they're up pretty high up there. Let's just call it 15, right? those may or may not be populations that are large enough to cause economic damage of a crop in an agriculture system. Sorry. So again, why augment? So one of the most important impacts on these oscillations is the reproductive rate of prey and their predators. Pests usually have a higher reproductive rate than predators and produce a large number of offspring. You can see on the right there, in the case of the two-spotted spider mite, which is a very common pest, it's clear that they're much faster and they lay more eggs. They're much faster at reproducing and they lay more eggs versus like a spider mite predator. They basically evolved, pests evolved basically, or prey evolved to survive by producing lots of offspring. So survival is about outgunning all the different ways that they can be killed. So if you look here on the left, that's the graph I showed before, which is just that classic Lotka-Volterra relationship. And then what happens to that predator curve when you augment, and that's represented by those red arrows. Those are points where the farmer actually augmented. What you do is you manage to keep that peak, that prey peak, down a lot lower, potentially to a point where you're not, they are not causing any economic harm. So, message: a sizable population of predators, whether it exists from conservation biocontrol practice or augmentation, is a way to keep pest populations low enough to maximize crop yield and quality. Okay, conservation biological control, aka farmscaping. This is what David called it. It's what I'm more used to. I like this idea because, like landscaping, it connotes an active human role. So a landscaper does landscaping and a farmer does farmscaping. So before the when I first agreed to do this presentation, I was asked to suggest some publications as homework for the audience. And I recommended this book, which is a great one to have. I don't know if anyone read it. Biodiversity and Insect Pests, Key Issues for Sustainable Management. And in this book, the authors use a very concise mnemonic device. It summarizes exactly what the farmer is actually doing when they're doing farmscaping. And it's this acronym SNAP. So by this definition, the author's definition is farmscaping can enhance natural enemy populations by providing shelter, nectar, alternative prey, and pollen. If you all walk away remembering anything from my talk, hopefully it's this acronym. So now to basically the gist of my talk is: when are SNAP resources not enough to attract or retain natural enemy populations to levels where they'll be effective in protecting the crop? Two situations that I can think of. Augmentation can be attractive or even necessary when the natural enemies are incapable of flight and the alternative prey is not present near the crop. Okay, so flight incapable natural enemies that are best to augment. Not all natural enemies are easily attracted from the crop surroundings. Most of the insects that David talked about are flying insect predators. And even if there are flight incapable natural enemies, they tend to arrive late, which again, timely presence of the natural enemy is what you're going for. most of them are attracted by floral resources like nectar and pollen, and they move to the crop through flight. Best example I can think of are the predatory mites. Yes, they also alternate feed on pollen, but again, you're expecting their populations to climb to higher to large enough levels to control the pest population. And give an example where the native natural enemy in the crop is just the native natural predatory mite in the crop. In this case, what I'm referring to is date palms out in Coachella, just cannot keep up with the populations of the pest because many of them overwinter in the grasses below in the orchard or date garden, whereas the particular mite that feeds on the palm can actually not technically fly from the overwintering sites down below, but they can do what's called ballooning. I'm not sure if you all are familiar with ballooning. It's basically when a pest mite, a web spinning mite, uses a tiny little bit of web that it's basically produced and uses it somewhat like a balloon or a parachute, and can be taken up. So again, in that case, technically the pest is flight capable and it can get up to where it causes the damage up in the date clusters way before the predatory mite that can control it. So this has been done. Augmentation of predatory mites is a decades-old practice, and of interest, it's a big success story for augmentative biological control in that it is practiced in strawberry production as well as greenhouse. But in strawberry production, what's kind of remarkable to me is that it's both conventional and organic growers who are using them. Again, it's a highly disturbed agricultural setting. It'd be difficult to plant, companion plants or, farmscape it. So augmentation's really helpful. Soil pests. That's another place where I think that augmentation is possibly a better strategy. There are naturally present entomopathogenic nematodes. So entomopathogenic meaning insect pathogen, insect disease causing, but they're not present in the populations aren't large enough because they need insects to survive or to continue to reproduce. So augmenting with entomopathogenic nematodes is smart. Likewise, the entomopathogenic fungi, they are naturally in the soil, but their spore load in the soil is not sufficient to, take out a pest that's, obviously been attracted to this concentrated food source that is the crop. And the entomopathogenic bacteria like Bacillus thuringiensis, likewise, evolved in the soil, but not enough of it there to really control some of the insect pests that are subterranean. All right, the second situation where augmentation can be attracted or even necessary is a situation where alternative prey isn't present. So what am I referring to when I talk about alternative prey? So back to this acronym, the A for alternative prey is basically it's usually an insect, could be a mite that is attractive to natural enemies and that they can feed on. The best way I think of to describe alternative prey is with this banker plant system. And so the components of a banker plant system would be the plant itself. So it's a host plant. And then the alternate prey or the alternate host or prey. And that's where the alternative host would have a strong preference to the banker plant without risk to targeted crops. I'm going to give some examples. And then obviously the last component would be the natural enemy, where, that slide is wrong. Anyway, here's some examples. Cherry oat aphid on grasses and oleander aphid on milkweed or plants in the dogbane family. Neither of these two, obviously you wouldn't want to augment cherry oat aphid if you're growing monocots like cereal crops or corn, but if you're growing broadleaf plants, these aphids will not move and become a pest in your broadleaf crop. But they will still attract aphid predators. And likewise, the oleander aphid, they will naturally infest wild milkweed, but actually inoculating milkweed with them is a way to attract more aphid natural enemies. This is here, the banker plant utilizing Banks grass mite is another approach here. So the Banks grass mite, again, is only a pest of monocots. It's actually the one that feeds on the palms that I was referring to earlier. So again, if you're not planting a cereal or palms, you can attract natural enemies of spider mites. So David showed a more close-up photo, but those arrows on the right, that's a corn leaf infested with Banks grass mite. And you see there 6 spider mite destroyer beetles that have arrived to feed. Their larvae were everywhere. Their pupal cases were everywhere. Another mite system is the spruce spider mite, which is only going to feed on conifers. This has been attempted with an evergreen short little dwarf. Forget the name of the species, but yeah, it can sustain these spruce spider mites and attract flying spider mite natural enemies. Obviously, if you were a Christmas tree farmer, this is a pest. And then the last one that I've seen used in greenhouses is using papaya plants, believe it or not, within a greenhouse, and then inoculating them with the papaya whitefly, which can be fed on by several parasitoids of, greenhouse whitefly or tobacco whitefly. So this was a neat one I saw. That pretty much sums up what I wanted to talk about. And Joanna, I think you can take it from here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Saul. That was very cool to hear about augmentation and farmscaping and alternative hosts and prey. Let's see. I don't know that there's questions specifically for. Oh, yes. Before we go to your questions, questions for you. Let's ask the audience questions. So, audience, please answer these 2 questions, and we'll take a minute or 2 before we close the poll. Saul, would you mind reading the questions and then talking about the answers?
True or false? Augmentated biological control is rarely compatible with conservation biocontrol because native natural enemies will outcompete insectary reared natural enemies. And the answer to that is false. In fact, there are insectary reared natural enemies, insectary reared and predatory insects and mites that can perform better than those in nature. Some of them have been selectively bred or bred in a way where they actually have a higher fecundity than the natives, so they lay more eggs and their populations grow larger. But yes, that's false. And then the second question: true or false? Floral resources such as nectar and pollen are the only way to provide supplementary nutrition to native natural enemies. That is also false. I talked about alternative prey. So, for example, the bird cherry aphid, the oleander aphid, bank spider mites, those are all non-pollen and nectar food sources.
All right, thank you, Saul. And I could see how people get that last question wrong because it's kind of a new concept. We hear a lot about how important flowers are, but not so much about the alternative prey. That is so important. One of the things that you didn't talk about, or maybe you did and I missed it, but how drones can be used with augmentation. And like we saw that picture of drones being used. No, we saw the picture of hands distributing predatory mites in strawberries, but are drones ever used in strawberries, or what crops are they used in?
Yes, they are. Roughly 6 years ago, when I moved into biocontrol consultative sales, is when the technology first became available to use drones to distribute natural enemies in crops. It's basically opened up the world to the outdoor crop world to biological control, since it had been primarily just a kind of a greenhouse strategy. Essentially, what the drones do is they practically eliminate labor costs. You saw those people putting out spider mite predators in the strawberry fields. That's a lot of man hours. The drones can knock out an acre in a minute if necessary. So they're using quite a few crops every year. It's growing. I'm going to work here soon with a vineyard who it's really interesting. What they want to do is they have a leaf hopper which starts in their cover crop. So they have a cover crop in the vineyard, and before the vines when the vines start to leaf out, after the canes have come out, they start to leaf out. The leaf hopper moves from the cover crop up into the vines and begins to feed and causes damage. And what this farmer wants to do, I thought was really cool, is he's coming in and actually applying lacewing using drones. And what's cool is you can get lacewing as eggs and basically put them in the crop. They hatch and they'll begin to feed. But what I thought was a really interesting strategy is, again, he's got environment down there, but that environment can also sustain pests. He's targeting the pests using drones and biological control with an insectary reared natural enemy before they become a pest of the crop.
Right. And then that cover crop might support the lacewings a little bit too.
Yeah, so if it works and they feed on the leafhopper nymphs, or perhaps even other aphids down there, might be a place where you use a cherry oat aphid, which only feeds on grasses. Now you have an insect that's gone through its life cycle, reaches adulthood, and now you have a flying insect. So you're basically just augmenting. In the sense I look at it, if you do conservation biocontrol and augmentative biocontrol together, you can almost look at the augmentative biocontrol as being a way to pop the system. I don't know if you know what I mean by that,
Right.
inoculate. Basically, you're inoculating. And then hopefully, since you have those resources there in and around the crop, those predators can continue to reproduce. It's usually that second generation that's really giving you in augmentative biocontrol, it's that second generation that's really giving you the what you're looking for. Because again, insects, they multiply. When they multiply, if they have food and the environment's right for them, they multiply exponentially. So just like insect pests do. So yeah.
Yeah, and so having both farmscaping and using augmentative control when you see that there's some concern for pest populations are starting to really grow, you come in with the augmentative, although you got to come in early enough. It sounds like if it's the second generation, that's really important. And
well, you see the bang for your buck in the second generation. That first generation is there basically to survive, to do some control, but then you really hope that it can reproduce. And it's not the case with every natural enemy. There are some, in particular predatory mites, where the goal is not for them to establish in the crop necessarily. But if they do, if it's, for example, strawberries, that they do feed, some of these predatory mites do feed on pollen, so they can establish, and it's not uncommon in even a disturbed, ecosystem like a strawberry field.
right. Okay, cool. Well, let's see. Going back to some of our audience questions. David, are you still there?
Sorry. Yes, I am still here.
Okay, good. Um, there was a question about California nettles, and it says, do California nettles that sting also count? And I think what they mean by that is, do they work for beneficials?
Yeah, it's the same species of nettle. In fact, I don't think it matters which species. There's like two or three, but most of them are Europe, or the ones you get in Europe. But I think it's native here too. So yeah, any nettle in the family Urtica or the genus Urtica will work, I think.
Oh, cool. Yeah, it was really interesting to see the main plants that worked for you all and up in Washington State are most of those plants, or at least their genuses occur here in California.
Yeah.
Maybe not the exact same buckwheat, but we have lots of buckwheat,
Right,
for
right.
example.
I mean, obviously, I only looked at the Washington buckwheats. We looked at them all, but I'm sure that Californian buckwheats will be just as good. But it'd be good for somebody to actually look at them, of course. I mean,
Of
you have lots. You have lots of species of buckwheat down there. So,
Yeah, it was really interesting to hear about how the yarrow, growers want to put in plants that work, first of all, but they also like to know that they're beautiful. So I hadn't heard before that the white yarrow it works better. And yeah,
yeah, yeah,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah.
Let's see. Here's another question for you, David. Wondering what we know of the uptake of insectary hedges and related habitat in the farms in the U.S. It seems so effective, and yet one doesn't often hear about farmers undertaking hedgerow plantings. Well, we here at Wild Farm Alliance help farmers with that, but how is that going, or do you think it's going here in the Western U.S.?
It could be a lot better. Yeah, I agree. It's just the uptake of this kind of strategy is just lagging. It doesn't. I mean, there's a few people that do it in Washington, but it hasn't sort of taken on. I'd worked in research for a long time, and I found that the best way to get innovative things established is to have a few people do it, and then their neighbours do it. But that doesn't seem to have happened yet. But I also learned in my career that it takes a long time. So maybe, it's happening, but it's happening very slowly. You know, it's only been a decade or so that's really got rolling. So maybe we need another decade. But, the facts are there. It does work. But, as I said, it's only the smaller farms that it will work well on. Large expansive areas of crops, it's harder to do because the insects won't fly that far or they take too long to get there. So there is a problem with that. But there's no reason why, you know, every small farm should not do this. They should do it.
Yeah, yeah, we know some big farms that have hedgerows surrounding every 10-acre block. And that's an ideal situation because then those beneficials can move, or they don't have to move too far to get to the pests. Um, uh, let's see, there was another one about how does enemy-free space help in conservation biocontrol in terms of predators? exactly sure.
I saw that too, and I'm not quite sure what that means either.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, let's move on. Let's see. Some growers are hesitant to add habitat due to food safety concerns. We certainly see that here. Any suggestions to help farmscaping?
No, I hadn't really heard that as a concern up here anyway.
Mm,
No, that would be a problem.
There is a concern about that that I've read. Habitat will often also attract rodents, and if the rodents get in the crop, it would be their feces that they're worried about.
yeah, yeah. Although there's been a bunch of research looking at rodents and which rodents, and they've seen that these bare ditches actually support lots of deer mice and big populations of deer mice, which then are can be really problematic compared to if you have a diverse habitat in a ditch. You're going to have lots of different species and they don't share food, they don't share pathogens, and they are not as big of a problem. At least that is some of the research. There's probably others out there. I know also we have seen Danny Karp's research from UC Davis that determined taking out habitat is a food safety risk after looking at thousands and thousands of data points, uh, and diversifying habitat means you have a diverse community of birds, which can reduce the incidence of pathogens, and it's really related to what you're next to. I think that's the bottom line, because if you're next to something that a landscape with pathogens, say like a confined animal feeding operation with lots of pathogens, then you'll birds may move that over, and or rodents into freshly eaten crop, then that's a problem. So, but there's ways to, plan for not being next to problem areas and or growing the crops that that's not an issue for. But let's see, here's a question, I think for Saul. Have you seen that if you pop the system, a treatment can then not be needed the next year?
Yeah. The goal is not establishment necessarily, but it can happen. And it's really kind of dependent on lots of things, mostly which natural enemy you are putting out. For example, predatory rove beetles. It may be that if you don't disturb the soil much, you don't need to put those out more than once a year. If establishment, even in greenhouses, they establish really well, where you never need to release them again. But again, it really is because of habitat, because those rove beetles feed on algae, and if you have algae, which is a food source, you can keep them around. They also feed on insect pests, soil insect pests. But yeah, it happens all the time. Again, it depends on the crop, and it depends on the predator, and also your chances of having establishment are going to be great if you include conservation biocontrol. If that's your focus, I like the idea of popping the system and giving that advantage to the natural enemy, hopefully establishing them before. And again, like that curve showed the peaks of pest populations, which is correlated with damage to the crop. You can reduce the height of those peaks.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Saul. David, can you recommend maintenance practices of native plant habitats that help to support beneficial insects? For example, when we need to mow to control invasive plants, how should we time the mowing?
Well, you need to know about the life cycles of what you're trying to protect and preserve, I guess. In most cases, I mean, that's a rare example that you're talking about there, probably. I mean, in most cases, I don't think you really need to do much. Really, that's part of the appeal of it. It's you can just leave it and let it be natural. Make sure it doesn't get sprayed, of course. We've mentioned that already. But there really shouldn't be much in the way of maintaining. If we're talking about, that's why we're using native plants. If there would be a lot of maintaining to do if we were using something that was exotic. But if you're using something native, and I'm thinking more bushes and shrubs and things and perennials, they're going to seed themselves and be perennial. There really shouldn't be much to do except for special circumstances like the one you mentioned.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we, as I mentioned, help growers put in hedgerows, for instance, and there is some maintenance the first couple of years where here in California where you have to irrigate in the summer because it's so dry, and so you have to make sure that irrigation the system didn't break. You have to make sure that the rodents so maybe there was rabbits that nobody talked about, and then they start coming in, and so you have to protect them and or manage the ground squirrels or the gophers. But and the other big thing is weeds, and so we really try and recommend, or we do recommend that growers put up to 6 inches of mulch around their shrubs and hedgerows when they plant them, because that can be make it or break it when the plants are really young. If the weeds smother them, then they can't make it. But once they get established, then the weeds aren't going to be a problem. They're going to be shaded out, basically.
Right. Yeah, exactly right. Establishment is the big thing. I mean, I was confused by the word maintenance, I guess, but establishment, in the trials we did, it was very important in that first season to keep them irrigated and mulched and everything else. But once they were established, that's when it became easy. That's the establishment.
Yeah, Erica says maintenance is actually a critical issue. We're establishing demonstration hedgerows in South Puget Sound, Washington, and are working on maintenance strategies for sustainability. Great, Erica, you could look on our website, look for installing habitat publication. You can download for free, and it talks about maintenance there too. Let's see. Other questions. I think we got to them all. We have a few minutes if there's anything else. David or Saul, you want to sum up and share?
Well, I
Yeah,
think what we've spoken about, both of us, is compatible. I mean, that it's not like either or, and so touched upon.
Exactly.
It's a compatible thing. In fact, a couple of years ago, I did a project looking at drones, using drones, sorry, to release cryptolemus beetles for mealybug control in a vineyard. But it was in combination with conservation biocontrol for spider mites. So, and that worked pretty well, you know. So it's definitely another, augmentative biocontrol is just another option that's compatible, which is the good thing, because you always sometimes get an outbreak of something like mealybugs or mites and need to use augmentative because the conservation isn't quite getting the results you need. So yeah, so what we've both talked about is all the one and the same, I think.
yeah, I do too. We're lucky to have you both. Saul, do you have any lasting thoughts or ending thoughts?
I'm in agreement with David. I'm gonna have to leave here, Joanne.
Oh,
But
okay.
I just put my email address there in the chat if anyone has questions. But yeah,
Yeah,
we've known each other for a bit, and you know about my passion for biological control and conservation is really what we should lead with. Let's put it that way.
yeah. That's a
All
sweet,
right, thanks
sweet
everyone.
ending.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. And before you all go, I'm sharing my screen just to remind you to that we have an evaluation at the end with a quiz. That is for everybody to tell us how we did, and then also specifically if you need continuing education credits, you'll need to take a 10-question quiz and get 70% of those questions right. And yeah, thank you everybody for attending. It's been a wonderful webinar.